Hello, I'm Daniel, and welcome back to the Library of Ideas, created by the Academy and Institute for Scientific and Educational Thought. This is the third episode of The Universal History of Civilizations. Last time, we walked among the temples and ledges of Mesopotamia, where gods became accountants and order became obligation. Today, we move west, to a land where water ruled more gently and time itself learned to flow. This is Egypt, where eternity became government. The gift of the Nile, rhythm instead of chaos. Each year, when Sirius first appeared in the dawn sky, the people of Egypt knew what it meant. The Nile would soon rise. Far to the south, in the highlands of Kush and Abyssinia, the rains began, sending a long, slow surge northward, a wave of life rather than destruction. By the time the waters reached the delta, the villages had prepared for the miracle, the inundation, the heartbeat of Egypt. Between June and September, the fields disappeared beneath the brown flood. To an outsider, it might have looked like ruin. To Egyptians, it was renewal. The farmer waited, watching the river's color darken. His wooden plow stood ready, his baskets patched, his family gathered on the high ground near the granary huts. When the waters withdrew, they left behind a black mantle of silt, the gift of life itself. The man and his sons waded into the soft earth, turning it with tools of wood and copper. His wife scattered seed, barley, emmer, flax, and offered the first handful to Hapi, the spirit of the Nile, so the river might remember their faith next year. The rhythm of labor matched the rhythm of the river. Days began before sunrise, when the air was still cool, and ended when the horizon turned gold. The woman tended her garden beside the house, feeding goats, weaving linen for trade. She sang to her children while grinding grain on a stone quern. Their daughter played nearby, shaping mud figurines of crocodiles and ibis, miniature gods she already knew by name. Religion was not apart from life. It was its pattern. In the evenings, when work was done, families gathered on rooftops to watch the sunset spill over the river. The men spoke of the Pharaoh, distant yet divine, he who makes the Nile flow for his people. They had never seen his face, but his name lived in every prayer, his image in every temple. As long as the floods came on time, his reign was just. By 3100 BCE, Nama united Upper and Lower Egypt, binding north and south into a single kingdom of rhythm and law. The same water that joined the two lands also joined heaven and earth, man and God. From this trust in balance, in Ma'at, came the serenity that defined Egypt for millennia. To live by the Nile was to live inside time itself, measured not by fear, but by return. Where other rivers brought chaos, this one taught harmony. The Egyptians did not conquer their world. They learned to breathe with it.
Sometimes thought needs silence to unfold. If these ideas find a place in you, perhaps stay a little longer. Subscribe and walk with the Library of Ideas. There's much more waiting beyond this page. Let's turn it together. In a moment.
The Pharaoh and the sky, the body of order. When Nama united Upper and Lower Egypt around 3100 BCE, he did more than conquer land. He fused heaven and earth into a single design. From that moment, Egypt ceased to be a territory. It became a cosmos, and the pharaoh its living axis. His crown bore both colors of the two lands, white for the desert's purity, red for the delta's fertile blood. To his people, he was not simply ruler, but rhythm, the pulse that kept Ma'at, the divine balance alive. Each dawn began with the pharaoh standing in his temple, facing east, arms raised toward the rising sun. Around him, priests chanted the names of Re and Horus, for in his body both gods were thought to dwell. The ritual was not worship, but maintenance. The world's continuation depended on his breath, his purity, his perfection. If the king faltered, the floods might fail, the crops might wither, the stars might stray from their path. To rule Egypt was not to command, it was to sustain. In Saqqara, Pharaoh Djoser sought to make this cosmic truth visible. Guided by his architect and priest, Imhotep, he raised the first step pyramid around 2650 BCE, a mountain of limestone climbing toward the sun. It was both tomb and cosmology, each layer a stair of ascent, from the dust of men to the brilliance of the gods. Imhotep measured its shadows to mark time itself, and the priests declared that through this order, eternity could be built by hand. Below the king, hierarchy echoed the pyramid's form. The vizier, his chief minister, kept the rhythm of the realm. Canals cleared, granaries sealed, taxes counted. Beneath him, the scribes wrote the state's memory, recording harvests and decrees in steady lines of ink and patience. The priests watched the sky, predicting the Nile's rise by the reappearance of Sirius. They were astronomers and administrators both, their calendars as sacred as their hymns. The soldiers patrolled Nubia and Sinai, not as conquerors, but as keepers of harmony's borders. For the commoner, life unfolded inside this divine machinery. The farmer plowed in the name of the pharaoh. The craftsman carved his statues as Horus, falcon of the heavens. Even a child, watching a temple procession, saw in the gold mask and ceremonial beard not a man, but the shape of eternity. Yet within this perfection lay solitude. In the palace at Memphis, surrounded by attendants and silence, the pharaoh dined alone. His food was tasted, his garments purified, his words transcribed as law. Each act was ritual, each gesture necessity. He carried not a scepter, but the burden of existence. When he died, his soul joined the sun's nightly voyage through the underworld, to be reborn at dawn, just as the Nile flooded and withdrew, just as life and death repeated their sacred rhythm. The pharaoh did not rule Ma'at. He was Ma'at, and under his eternal gaze, Egypt learned the secret of endurance, that obedience to order could feel like peace. The house of eternity, death as continuity. For the Egyptians, death was not an ending. It was a pause, a breath between one form of being and the next. The Nile rose and fell, the sun vanished each night, only to return at dawn. Why should human life be any different? Around 2600 BCE, under Pharaoh Khufu, they built proof of that conviction, the Great Pyramid of Giza. A mountain of stone, aligned with the stars, raised so that the soul of the king could rise each morning with the sun. Tens of thousands labored on the plateau. They were not slaves, but workers summoned from across Egypt during the flood months when the fields slept beneath the waters. In their village, a rhythm of huts and workshops, life was ordered and communal. Bakers fired bread, brewers filled jars, masons shaped limestone with copper chisels that rang like music in the heat. Songs and laughter echoed between the blocks, hymns to Ra, to the king whose tomb they raised. Even the humblest worker believed that his sweat joined the eternal order. The priests moved among them like shadows, guarding ritual purity. Before the first stone was laid, offerings were made. Before each day's work began, the foreman invoked Mat, balance, truth, cosmic order. At dusk, as the light softened, the overseer poured beer onto the ground for the spirits of the dead, that they too might share in rest. Inside the mortuary temple, other priests prepared the journey beyond. The art of embalming had become theology. The body, the seat of the ka, the vital essence, was washed with natron and oils, then wrapped in linen by the openers of the mouth, who whispered prayers to restore breath. Over the heart, they placed amulets shaped like scarabs, so the soul would not testify against itself when weighed before Osiris. The Ba, the wandering spirit, was painted as a bird with a human head, destined to fly between tomb and heaven. Centuries later, in Thebes, the Book of the Dead was copied onto papyrus, spells and instructions to guide the soul through the trials of the afterlife. Each line was both law and hope. I have not stolen. I have not lied. I have not diminished the fields. To speak truth was to pass the test of the feather of Mut. Women carried this faith in their voices. As mourners or priestesses of Isis, they stood beside the tombs, hair unbound, voices rising in lament that was half grief, half invocation. In homes far from Giza, wives kept small household shrines, leaving bread and beer for ancestors, whispering their names so they would not fade. To forget a soul was the only true death. From the king's pyramid to the peasant's grave, all Egypt was one great construction of memory. Stone and ritual, prayer and craft, everything conspired to outlast the flesh. The living built not for themselves, but for continuity. They believed that to sustain the dead was to sustain the world. And so, beneath the endless sky, Egypt became what it most desired to be, a place where time could not win. Echo. The Nile remembered. The wind moves softly through the broken colonnades of Luxor. Sand lies where once stood courtyards of gold, and the faces of gods, carved in perfect symmetry, now stare into nothing. I walk among them as an Alexandrian scholar, 2,000 years removed from Khufu and Ramses, and yet their presence clings to the air like dust that refuses to settle. The inscriptions of Thutmose III still breathe on the temple walls. Victories, offerings, prayers, their colors faded, their certainty untouched. Even Herodotus, who called Egypt the gift of the Nile, could not have imagined how much of that gift would remain when all else had turned to sand. The Nile still flows, though its floods have grown timid. Peasants still plant when Sirius rises, still offer a pinch of grain to the unseen god of the river. Yet the empire that once measured eternity now measures silence. The pyramids at Giza glow pale in the dusk, perfect as geometry, empty as time. I touch the hieroglyphs on the wall of Abu Simbel, the lines so sharp they could have been carved yesterday, and I understand what it means to win the war against decay. It means to be unheard. Egypt's immortality feels less like victory than surrender. To achieve eternal order, it sacrificed movement. To conquer death, it bound itself to repetition. The pharaohs became stone, the gods became equations, and the people became echoes, reflections of a pattern too sacred to change. And yet, in that stillness, there is something that humbles the living. Perhaps civilization's highest art is not progress, but patience. The Nile's rhythm endures, indifferent to kings and scholars alike. I watch it pass, calm, eternal, unhurried, and wonder whether this, not conquest, is humanity's true masterpiece. To find peace not in becoming, but in remaining. Thank you for joining me, Daniel, here at the Library of Ideas, created by the Academy and Institute for Scientific and Educational Thought. This concludes our journey through Egypt, where eternity became government. Join me next week for the 4th episode of the Universal History of Civilizations, China Before China, the Birth of Order. And remember, every Wednesday, we continue our exploration of ideas in the history of economics in 25 scenes. Until next time, may your thoughts flow as steadily as the Nile.